Well, welcome everybody to our March edition of Manuscript Mondays, March 10, 2024. The mission of the Manuscript Society is to encourage the collection and preservation of manuscripts and documents, to stimulate and aid collectors in their various collecting specialties, and to facilitate the exchange of information and knowledge among collectors, scholars, dealers, and the general public. It was founded in 1948 as the National Society of Autograph Collectors, and now includes not just collectors, but also manuscript curators, librarians, dealers, auction houses, and has members from around the world: Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, and South America. The Society publishes the Manuscript Society Quarterly Journal, Manuscripts, and a quarterly newsletter, the Manuscript Society News. It has a scholarship program. The Richard Moss Research Grant is currently closed, but will be available again next year. Please visit the Manuscript Society website for more information. And finally, the Manuscript Society holds an annual meeting offering behind the scenes tours for members and fun-filled get-together in different areas of the country. And this year's meeting is being held in New York City from April 23rd to the 27th. For this episode of Manuscripts Mondays, we have Laura Micham, the director of the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History and Culture, and the curator of Gender and Sexuality History Collections in the Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Duke University. She acquires, preserves, and promotes the use of this material and has a particular interest in feminist activism and theory, reproductive health and rights, and the history and culture of LGBTQIA communities. She'll share some of the ways the Lisa Unger Baskin collection has been cataloged and described, used for teaching and exhibits, and it documents the women's work broadly conceived from the mid-15th century to the mid-20th century. So without further ado, Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Jay, for inviting me to participate in the Manuscript Society's Manuscript Monday event series, and thank you for that kind introduction. I'm glad to be with all of you and happy to contribute to Women's History Month with my talk entitled The Sally Bingham Center and the Lisa Unger Baskin Collection, Yours Respectfully, a Wild Project, but Grand. This evening, I want to give you a sense of how the Lisa Unger Baskin Collection has continued to make an impact since we packed up the exhibition at the Grolier Club in New York City in February of 2020, just as the pandemic was beginning. The detail in this slide is fittingly from an item in that exhibit and in the Duke exhibit as well. It's from a letter written by abolitionist, women's, and Native American rights activist and journalist Lydia Mariah Child to Mr. Strickland on December 6, 1875. In it, Child replies to Strickland's request for her autograph and information about abolitionist John Brown. Brown led an effort from October 16th to 18th, 1859 to initiate a slave revolt in the southern states by taking over the United States arsenals at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. About John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Child writes, "Noble old man. His foray into Virginia seemed a wild project, but the feeling that impelled him was grand, and I know of nothing in history more sublime." I think it's safe to say that the Lisa Unger Baskin collection project has been wild, but grand. In my talk, I'll share a bit about the project, show some of the manuscripts and other annotated and handmade items in the collection, and describe some of the ways that we and our constituents have interacted with the Baskin collection over the past 5 years. So who is Lisa Unger Baskin? Lisa Baskin is a noted bibliophile, activist, and collector who carefully assembled the collection over 45 years. It was considered the largest collection of women's history in private hands before it came to Duke. And we packed the collection into 600 crates that filled 2 semi-trucks, which drove nonstop from Leeds, Massachusetts to Durham, North Carolina, and arrived at Duke in April of 2015. In the subsequent 4 years, we did an enormous amount of fundraising, research, cataloging, and curated 3 exhibits, wrote an 160-page catalog, and celebrated all of this in 12 public, semi-public, and private events. The first exhibit was on display from January to May in 2016 and was called, quote, "Heralding the Way to a New World, Exploring Women in Science and Medicine Through the Lisa Unger Baskin Collection." In February 2019, we opened 500 Years of Women's Work, the Lisa Unger Baskin collection, the largest exhibit ever presented by Duke University Libraries, including as it did over 270 items. A version of the show traveled to the Grolier Club in New York City and opened in December of 2019. At that time, New York Times writer Jennifer Schuessler observed that in her collecting, quote, Ms. Baskin spiraled backward and outward, assembling a kaleidoscopic record of women both arguing for their rights and simply going about their business. And in her National Geographic article, Michelle Norris called the Baskin collection the, quote, world's largest record of women in work and professional enterprise. The images on this slide are of Lisa in front of one of the cases in the exhibit, as well as the cover of the exhibit catalog. What is the collection? It's a transformative body of material documenting women at work. In Baskin's own words, quote, the unifying thread is that women have always been productive and working people, and this history has essentially been hidden. The collection includes many well-known monuments of women's history and arts, as well as lesser-known works produced by women scholars, printers, publishers, laborers, scientists, authors, artists, and political activists. Taken together, they comprise a mosaic of the ways that women have been productive, creative, and socially engaged for more than 500 years. The manuscript receipt pictured on this slide is an example of the everyday records Lisa collected to document the lives of working women. Sister of two printers and married to another, Lydia Bailey was an experienced printer when she inherited a struggling shop upon the death of her husband in 1808. Industrious and enterprising, she printed for the Presbyterian Church and numerous charitable organizations, including the Female Tract Society. And from 1813, she was printer to the city of Philadelphia and master printer at one of the busiest printing shops in the city, employing over 40 workers. The business printed almanacs, annual reports, bookseller catalogs, broadsides, and chapbooks. She was a printer for 53 years. The focus of the Lisa Unger Baskin collection is the early modern period to the mid-20th century, mainly in Western Europe, Britain, and the United States. There are over 12,000 print items, over 250 discrete manuscript collections, and an array of artifacts, from a British suffrage tea set, the most complete of its kind, to Virginia Woolf's writing desk. The earliest document shown on this slide is a 1240 scribal parchment documenting the execution of a bequest made by the late Marcus and wife Ugolilea to the Archbishop of Pisa to establish a house for repentant prostitutes. The two largest manuscript collections are the Emma Goldman papers and the Ladies of Llangollen collection. Emma Goldman was an anarchist known for her political activism, writing, and speeches. The collection features over 300 letters, primarily written by Emma Goldman, although other anarchists, activists, and thinkers are also represented as authors, including Alexander Berkman, Eugene Debs, Harry Kelly, Alexander Shapiro, and the Socialist Party of New England. In the late 18th century, Eleanor Butler and Sarah Ponsonby, also known as the Ladies of Llangollen, left their lives in the upper tiers of Anglo-Irish society and made a home for themselves in Llangollen, Wales, to the disapproval of both of their families. Butler and Ponsonby appeared to have understood their relationship as a marriage, and they were known for dressing alike in masculine clothing. They were part of an emerging culture of romantic friendship between same-sex couples. And while they lived a life of rural retreat, the ladies' relative celebrity and social status meant that their home, Plas Newydd, became a salon. The Ladies of Llangollen collection, which is the largest of its kind outside the National Library of Wales, is made up of materials both by and about Lady Eleanor Butler and Miss Sarah Ponsonby's life at their home. On the next several slides, I'll share some more highlights from the collection. First, early printed books. Lisa Baskin considers the early works in her collection to be its heart. The collection includes critical early landmarks of women's history, as well as extraordinary examples of women's contributions across a range of disciplines, arts, and crafts. The item on this slide, the earliest documented printing by women, is from the press at the convent of San Jacopo di Ripoli in Tuscany in 1478. The nuns set type, sewed folios, and provided financial backing for the press. The collection includes 2 copies of the Pseudo-Petrarchan text. The copy depicted on this slide is untrimmed with copious marginalia. The manicule, a hand with pointing finger and very long arm, points insistently to an entry for the mythic Pope Joan and proclaims Papa Femina. Can you imagine the reader, perhaps a young seminarian, encountering a story of a woman pope and reacting to it in this way? Women artists. The collection includes extensive materials documenting women's artistic expression, one of Lisa's longest and strongest passions. Her interest in women artists and their work is wide-ranging and includes painters, photographers, illustrators, bookbinders, metalworkers, embroiderers, calligraphers, and graphic designers. Pictured on this slide is a letter from Italian painter Artemisia Gentileschi. Gentileschi was one of the most accomplished artists of the 17th century and the first woman to become a member of Florence's Accademia e Compagnia delle Arti del Disegno. Gentileschi's powerful depictions of women, memorably her Judith slaying Holofernes, brought her notice. This letter to the scholar and Gentileschi's great patron, Cassiano dal Pazzo, requests permission for her assistant to carry arms, as she is now living in Naples, a more dangerous city. She also promises that she is sending, quote, my portrait, which you once requested, unquote. Abolition. Anti-slavery movements and their leaders and participants is another area of deep focus in the collection. Here you see a portrait of Sojourner Truth alongside a signed manuscript by Harriet Beecher Stowe promoting Truth's autobiography. Feminist and abolitionist Sojourner Truth was one of the towering figures of 19th century America. She was born into slavery in 1797 on a rural farm in Ulster County, New York. At age 30, she drew strength from her Christian faith and found the courage to escape with her infant daughter. By the 1860s, Truth had moved to Battle Creek, Michigan, and between 1863 and 1875, she had at least 14 different photographic portraits made. She sold them to provide income for herself. These carte de visite and cabinet cards were portable and far cheaper to produce than copies of her narrative. Truth controlled every aspect of the way she was depicted in these images, genteelly in cap and shawl, often with her knitting, a book, or photograph in her lap, obscuring her disabled right hand. Harriet Beecher Stowe rocketed to celebrity with the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, selling 300,000 copies during its first year in print. Sojourner Truth saw an opportunity here. She asked Stowe to write a promotional statement that would bring notice to her autobiographical narrative. She and Stowe met for the first and only time in 1853, and this signed statement appears as an introduction in some of the copies of the 1853 edition to the narrative. Suffrage. One of Lisa's earliest interests was suffrage for Black men in the United States and for women both in the US and in Britain. On this slide is a detail from a letter written by suffrage leader Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who, by the way, worked in both the US and British suffrage movements. The letter is to fellow suffrage leader Sarah McClintock. Stanton and McClintock drafted the Declaration of Sentiments on McClintock's tea table over the course of 2 days. At the end of the letter, Stanton inquires, quote, would you sell the table on which the declaration was written, and what would you ask for it? I'm happy to say that she was able to purchase the table. So in this portrait of Stanton with her collaborator, Susan B. Anthony, she is wearing a dress, and I hope you can see this. It has a pattern of chains on it, which of course is a powerful symbol that was adopted by both the anti-slavery and women's suffrage movements. Science. One of our favorite heroines in the collection is the 17th century scientist and artist, Maria Sibylla Merian. A keenly observant entomologist and artist, Merian was the first to study and depict the metamorphosis of insects in the field. During her career, she described and illustrated the life cycles of 186 insect species from direct observation, amassing evidence that contradicted the contemporary notion that insects were born of mud by spontaneous generation. She taught girls botanical drawing and sold her specimens, prints, and books to earn a living. On this slide is a portrait of Merian of her own design that appeared as the frontispiece in her books, along with one of her many hand-drawn and colored illustrations of metamorphosis that also appeared in her books. Literature. Lisa Baskin has emphasized women's social history in her collecting, but she did acquire some extraordinary works related to women's literature. The volumes, manuscripts, and artifacts speak to the work and craft of writing and to the networks and connections between creative women. The details on this slide are from a letter written by Charlotte Bronte to her lifelong friend, Ellen Nussey, with an update on her efforts to secure work as a governess. She goes on to relate a visit from the wife of a curate whose husband ruined their family through his drinking and quote treated her and her child savagely. Bronte attests to her own distaste for the curate even before she knew about his abusive character. Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell quotes this section of the letter in her biography of Bronte, noting that it, quote, shows her instinctive aversion to a particular class of men whose vices have supposed she looked upon with indulgence. In other words, folks assumed that she would not take exception to men like this, and in fact, this letter proves that she did. So, sharing the exhibit. During the pandemic, I was invited by community groups to give presentations about the 500 Years of Women's Work exhibit. A couple of examples. The first was the Burwell School, a 19th century school in Hillsborough, North Carolina, that is now a state historical and cultural center focused on a number of topics, including abolition and women's history. Also in 2020, officers from the Reviewers Club, a women's group that started at Duke in the early 1920s, invited me to speak as a part of their centennial celebrations. For both of these groups, I created a Zoom-based tour of the Duke exhibit with this image in the slide deck. The image is of the entrance to the Mary Duke Biddle exhibit suite, where most of the exhibit was located. The quote on the left is the one by Lisa that I read earlier. The unifying thread is that women have always been productive and working people, and this history has essentially been hidden. And the image on the right is of a 1637 woodcut by English barrister William Austin, who advocated for legal and public liberties for women. It references Leonardo da Vinci's iconic Vitruvian Man, an image that defined ideal human proportions. Austin replaces the figure with the female body. Though diminutive, the image is monumental in spirit and one of Lisa's favorite images in the entire collection. Catalogs and cataloging. We have continued to catalog the collection using the methods of enhanced description that our wonderful catalogers developed and honed throughout the project. One of the main functions of this cataloging involves the names of creators, authors, illustrators, subjects, etc., previously absent from records kept by the Library of Congress, for catalogers to draw on in their work. One example, which you can see on this slide, is a receipt associated with a free Black woman in Revolutionary era Boston. It's an admissions document to a Boston almshouse for Dinah Gibbs, dated August 1st, 1793. She's listed in the records of the overseers of the poor, but those records don't note her race, like on the admissions document. Our cataloger, Lauren Reno, created a name authority record for Dinah Gibbs, which includes her race. So now catalogers and by extension scholars can draw on this for their work. When the exhibit catalog sold out, we enlarged the online version of it with elements of the print version, including full text of all of the essays. We also added links to recordings of all the Duke and Grolier Club events that were captured. The URLs are on the bottom of this slide. One more example of expanding Baskin collection related resources. We've begun to assemble the Lisa Unger Baskin papers, Lisa's collection of personal and professional papers documenting her life and work as a collector and activist. Instruction. We teach with the collection regularly. One example is a class taught every year, Women in the Visual Arts, 1400 to 1800. The course considers the roles women have played in early modern art world as makers, buyers, patrons, donors, critics, and art collectors. The focus is on visual representations as well as period writing of and by women. The fall 2021 class focused on Lisa Baskin as a collector, as well as the Baskin collection itself, using many of the items that had been on exhibit and thus not available to students for several semesters. When the class came to the Rubenstein Library this semester, we shared the Halsey family manuscript memorandum book shown on this slide. The Halsey family of London used this memorandum book to record marriages, births, christenings, deaths, burials, family genealogy, and even business transactions. Some of its pages are paper, while others were treated with a gesso-like substance to provide an erasable surface that could be written on using a metal stylus, not present here. The stylus slipped through the silver fastenings to hold the book closed. You can see the silver fastenings, hopefully, at least on the lower image on this slide. The embroidered binding was likely done by a female member of the family. And you can see on the left, the day is depicted on the front cover, and on the right, a detail from the back cover depicting night. Some other classes we support using the Baskin collection are women in the visual. I mentioned women in visual arts, didn't I? Writing 101, book art and object, women in the economy, history of the book, women printers, publishers, and readers, and Project Vox, early modern women intellectuals, and others. Exhibitions. Items from the Baskin collection have appeared in a number of exhibitions in recent years. The largest one in this list is focused on women's suffrage. On August 18th of 2020, we commemorated the centenary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment and the nearly 8 decades of activism that led to it by publishing an online exhibit entitled Beyond Supply and Demand, Duke Economics Students Present 100 Years of American Women's Suffrage. This was the culmination of a year of work with 38 students and their professor in Duke's Women in the Economy course. The students were tasked with going beyond the simple tools of supply and demand to examine original archival materials from the Rubenstein Library to explore the complexities and strategies of the suffrage movement. Students selected and researched over 40 items, including many items from the Lisa Unger Baskin collection. Because of the pandemic, we couldn't mount the physical exhibit until 2029, but it was lovely. And in the interim period, we were able to, after we mounted it, but before we could open the doors, we did a number of videos of walking tours of the exhibit, which we then presented in Zoom-based events. So it was a very interesting use of Zoom technology and phone cameras, phone video capturing, if you will, in an early part of the pandemic. Pretty exciting. Intersections. The Baskin collection has been and continues to be a robust part of the Sally Bingham Center. The collection complements many areas of the center's holdings that we continue to actively build, from 17th and 18th century women binders and printers to abolition and women's suffrage movements. The Bingham Center's 20th and 21st century collections, documenting women activists in particular, are a vital through line for many of these collections. For example, in 2022 and 2023, I worked with PhD student from the Duke History Department, Kamal Pope, on an exhibit documenting the life and work of Southern Black lesbian activist Mandy Carter, pictured on this slide. She credits her early years in a Quaker school with inspiring her 5+ decades of activist work in anti-war, women's, queer, and racial justice movements. We included an image and text of Quaker suffrage and abolitionist leader Lucretia Mott, also on this slide, bringing together elements of the Baskin collection with materials from the Mandy Carter papers and other texts that were on display. So the Lisa Unger Baskin collection, by bringing together materials from across the centuries, the Lisa Unger Baskin collection reveals what has been hidden, that women have long pursued a startling range of careers and vocations, and that through their work, they have supported themselves, their families, and the causes they believed in. The collection makes the true breadth of women's contributions visible. The Baskin collection is certainly grand, and our experience with it a bit wild at times. The Lisa Unger Baskin collection affirms the value both of women's history and of women's perspectives on history. Her work to build the collection provides a particular lens on women's history, and it is important to have named collections built by women on our shelves alongside the impressive named collections built by men. Excitingly, we continue to receive other women's history collections assembled by women collectors. One such example is the Sarah Westfall collection. Sarah Westfall, who received her PhD from Yale in 1983, was a member of the Department of Germanic Languages and Literature and an affiliate of the Women's Studies program at Duke from 1983 to 1986. In addition to her long academic career as a scholar of medieval German literature, Westphal spent 35 years amassing a collection of over 600 books printed, illustrated, or published by women from the 17th to the 20th century. Westphal's particular interest was women in Britain and continental Europe in the 18th century. This collection complements the Baskin collection especially well. Thank you. And I'm glad to respond to questions. But first, I just want to share what this lovely image is on the left-hand side of the screen. It is, of course, another Baskin collection item. The Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association produced these Votes for Women bluebird tins. So this was a tin sign as a means of spreading information surrounding the Massachusetts suffrage referendum of November 2nd, 1915, which ultimately failed, sadly. Made in a World War I manufacturing facility, the bluebird was a symbol of hope, resilience, and optimism. Note the artistic license taken, making the typical red coloring of the bluebird's belly changed to the suffrage yellow gold. Thank you. And that is all I have for now. And I would love to take questions. Let me look at the chat. Nothing in the chat.
Yeah, can you hear me right now? Hey, Laura,
I
that was
can.
wonderful. I'll ask a question. What inspired Laura Unger Baskin to or Lisa Unger Baskin to begin collecting in this area, and then how did she go about doing it?
Well, that's a great question. So, Lisa is in her 80s. So she was very active in the civil rights movement and the women's movement and other mid-20th century liberation movements. So when she was a young woman, a secondary school student, and then a college student, she was frustrated by the lack of content in her coursework related to women. Right. I should say that even before that, as a child, she was very, very interested in collecting. Her father was the chair of the board of the Brooklyn Public Library, and Lisa tells a story about never wanting to return her library books, and that her father began to help her to build a book collection, not with the library books, but with other books, and so that by the time she went to college, many of the closets and drawers in her room were filled with books, right? So this was a very early set of interests and passions. But women's history in particular was important to her for two reasons that I mentioned: the mid-20th century liberation movements that she participated in, and the lack of women's history content in any of her classes. Her first two areas of deep interest were women artists and suffrage.
Thank you. What's your favorite piece in the collection? I also know who your favorite kid is, so.
I know, right? That's really hard. I mean, I could say that Maria Sibylla Marion is a source of great excitement for us. I mean, I know that she's gotten to be pretty vogue in recent years. I can tell you that when I was talking to my 18-year-old about this talk, who is pretty well read for 18-year-olds, he had heard of Maria Sibylla Marion. And I know that she's gotten to be pretty big, but when I was doing the research for the very first exhibit, which was focused on science and medicine, I was particularly interested in learning that Maria Sibylla Marion, studied insects in the field alive instead of many of the men, her male counterparts, who would kill the animals before they depicted them, before they, finished studying them or depicted them. She did not kill the creatures that she studied, which was wonderful. She was considered, her artistic ability was considered unsurpassed in her time. Her artistic ability and her scientific ability together resulted in proving to people, as I said in my talk, that insects weren't born of mud, which is another way of saying that they were divinely inspired, that they are some of God's creatures, if you will, right? Which is not something that anybody thought about. Most people believed that only human beings were God's creatures, or many people believed that during her lifetime. So she made an enormous difference on many, many levels.
Do you have a first? Does Duke have a first edition of that book?
We do. We have both of her major books.
Because I know they recently issued a reproduction of it, facsimile. That's really nice.
It is. It's stunning
among the students at William and Mary.
Yeah, it's stunning.
What surprised you as you've been processing the collection?
Um, well, didn't really surprise us, but probably of interest to the folks gathered tonight because many of you are collectors, but also to archivists because this will be very meaningful to you as folks who work with archival collections, and that is that we encounter more times than maybe we anticipated the sort of coming together physically in the same folders, sort of manuscript material and material about collecting those manuscripts, right? So Lisa didn't really keep a separate set of, if you will, business correspondence folders with the various dealers she worked with or the shops she went to or the materials she bought. These were often together, especially with the manuscript materials in the same folders. And so we have worked very hard to keep the manuscripts together, but separate from the receipts and other material that we would not be able to provide access to in the reading room for security and other reasons. But with those business materials, those business files, and other materials that document Lisa as a collector, which we also found in amongst the collection, we have started some years ago to create the Lisa Unger Baskin papers. And now we are in conversation, have been for some time, for quite a long time, conversation with Lisa and her family about the files still in her possession, documenting her life as a collector and as an activist and as an artist and as a publisher and a Democratic Party activist and other roles that she's played in her life. She has many files documenting these dimensions of her life that will come to Duke, probably in the nearest term to complete the Lisa Unger Baskin papers.
Is she still collecting?
She is. She is absolutely still collecting. Yeah. We said, I can't imagine how painful it was for her when the shelves were emptied, into those 600 containers and put on those 2 semi trucks that I mentioned earlier. I actually was not there for that because I was there a couple weeks before with my colleague Craig Braden, our audiovisual materials archivist and oral historian. He and I worked together to create a film of Lisa with a film crew, which was pretty extraordinary. So then other folks from the Rubenstein Library turned up about 2 weeks after we were finished with the filming to pack the collection. So there are many pictures of the collection being packed and of Lisa watching the trucks move away. I think that was pretty painful for her, because as you said, it's like your children. It really was like, in some sense, children. And the empty shelves, I think, were also really difficult for her to bear. So the combination of her intense desire to collect and her desire to fill those empty shelves, she has been working away on that these 10 years since the collection came to us.
Why Duke University?
So we were one of a number of institutions that were asked to create a proposal. It starts with a kind of a cool story. My boss is Andy Armacost, who himself was, he's the head curator here. He was in the trade before. He's a trained art historian. He worked in a special collections context. Then he was in the trade. And then he came to Duke many years ago. So, he really has all these perspectives. He knew his early work was all sort of in the Baltimore area, but also in the Northeast. So he knew about the Lisa Unger Baskin collection. He knew it existed. And he was at a book fair with Lisa's son, Hosey Baskin, who is also a book dealer, rare materials dealer. They were in a layover in a flyover city somewhere, and there was a delay. So they had hours to kill in an airport. And my boss, Andy Armacost, decided to ask Hosey about the collection, which is pretty great. And they had a wonderful, wonderful conversation about it. And Hosey said, in fact, my mother is trying to decide, what institution to put the collection in. Lisa was ready to do that because she lives in a sort of older wooden farmhouse in Western Massachusetts, which in her neighborhood, her area, her region had experienced a lot of very serious weather, very heavy snows that were hard on roofs, very heavy rains. So she was afraid that harm might come to the collection. She was ready for it to be used in a library setting and to be shared and to impact as it has and will continue to the understanding of women's history. So there were a number of institutions that she had in mind that she would consider, and we were one of that number. And we created, as the other institutions did, a very extensive proposal for every aspect of how we would work with the collection and share it. And we were chosen.
Excellent. Now, regarding the Emma Goldman letters, would these be a collection that Lisa would have bought as a whole, or would have been individual pieces that she acquired over the years?
So both the Emma Goldman papers and the Ladies of Llangollen collection, as far as I understand it, especially the letter, the correspondence portions of those, were all a piece. They were all one lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, two separate lots, the ladies and Emma Goldman, but they were not pieced together over years, as I understand it. They were both bodies of material that Lisa acquired.
And could you talk a little bit about some of the areas you're collecting in now?
Well, we're sort of collecting in all of the big areas that Lisa is also interested in, but in broader areas too. So, I mean, the Bingham Center, if you're talking about the Bingham Center obviously is it's a broad-based women's history library and archive, documenting public and private lives of women past and present is the phraseology that we use. We go all the way back to that 12th century document that I started my presentation with, and all the way forward to materials that were published or written or produced just in the last couple of years. So I recently supported the Women in the Economy class that I also mentioned in my presentation. That class comes for multiple sessions to the Rubenstein Library, and we share about 150, 175 years of women's history with that class. So we go all the way back to the mid 19th century and all the way forward to as close to the present as we can. And I got to use a collection of zines, bilingual, multicultural, international run of zines that I purchased very recently that are dated 2022 and 2023. So that's pretty exciting. I think what we are documenting really deeply and have done for a very long time, and the Baskin collection, of course, complements it very well, is although I didn't really talk about it so much in my presentation today, is women's reproductive health and rights and the women's health movement more broadly. So we that's a very deep collection for us. Lisa has the Lisa Unger Baskin collection has I said science, but really I could have said medicine and science. Medicine is a science. There are just not a lot of manuscripts in the medical part of the collection, so that's why I focus more on the science to show off Maria Sibylla Marian. But the medical history of women's medicine material is extraordinary in the Lisa Unger Baskin collection. So that is another big area for us.
How do you go about growing the collection? The different ways you do it?
So the Baskin collection in particular, I have spent, I've been a Duke for much longer than the collection's been here, and I was a part of, almost all the aspects of the Baskin project. So I feel like I have a really strong idea of what would make sense, what would complement the collection. So I purchase material on a regular basis from various different wonderful rare materials dealers. We have relationships with lots of them. I have really deep relationships, sort of years long relationships with a few that I work with all the time. And that's a big way that we add to the collection. It's only very rarely that we would add the Lisa Unger Baskin collection note to an item. That only happens once in a great while, just a few times a year. And it almost always is in conjunction with Lisa. So it could be that, and it has happened, that we've all, that is to say, Andy Armacost, whom I mentioned earlier, the head curator, and I, or one of my curatorial colleagues, is at a book fair with Lisa, and an item is identified, is found, is seen, is known. So we know about it before we get there. A lot of times that we all converge at that dealer's booth and decide together what to do. And if it's acquired, for Duke, then it normally gets the Lisa Unger Baskin collection note.
Great. Anybody else have any other questions for Laura? Laura, thank you very much again for a wonderful presentation. Stay tuned for the April, yes, April. Next Manuscript Mondays in April. So I'll see you then. I can't believe it's already April. It's already March 10th. So spring is finally getting here. So I hope everybody has a great evening, and thank you very much again, Laura. And thank you, Lee, for the technical support. And hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody. Take care.